talk about.
We shall do that on top of the other topics. That sounds good. In fact, I can even a video of those folks at some point.
Yeah, I like that.
We need to set that up.
We should. Yeah.
This is Lansing Online News Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. You're listening to Lansing Online News Radio with Bonnie Bucqueroux and Bill Castanier on a frigid, cold, miserable kind of evening in Lansing, Michigan. Bill, have you thought out yet?
It's perfect for Thanksgiving.
You think so?
Oh yeah, because it could trap people like on the road all across the country soon.
If that nor'easter
That
hits
is,
on the East
yeah,
Coast.
yeah, if that comes through, but we're going south again, it looks like.
Oh,
Going to the Carolinas first and then coming back up.
no, please,
There are
please.
people on vacation down in the Carolinas right now are going to be much surprised, I think. Yeah.
Including all the people in Texas who
We really have never had a terrible, terrible, serious Thanksgiving storm in the Midwest.
That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, we've had some that are, slipping and sliding, but not the really big disasters.
No, it's like 1 foot of snow or 2 foot of snow. No, we've never had one, and they keep calling for one sometime. And if it does, you put all those people on the road. 75 million people, something like that.
I never understand why this is the biggest travel day. You'd think Christmas would be.
Yeah. Do you remember when was the problem in Chicago last year? Remember when all the people got stuck right downtown? They couldn't move.
Oh yeah.
That's what it would be like all across America.
Oh God, that would be a little more than exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll just keep our fingers crossed.
Do you have a
for the
survival kit in your vehicle?
You think I would?
I do.
I have
a
I
candle and
yes,
that kind of
I've
stuff.
got stuff in there.
Yeah.
I do too. And I've even got one of those little gizmos where you can burn twigs in this burner
Oh, I saw
and
that.
charge your cell phone at the same time. Yes.
That's
So I'm all set. I'm
You didn't go with the intermediate one with the crank?
no. Oh, I've
Okay.
got a crank emergency radio. So yes, I mean every little gizmo like that.
Burn twigs in.
Yep. You can even burn cardboard in there. It'll do it.
Hmm.
So when you get desperate, you can just take all those old City Pulse and everything else that they've got out, those freebies, put them in there and torch them up. Well, tonight we are joined, and this is, we've been doing a significant number of shows on the medical marijuana issue in Michigan and on the potential for legalization of marijuana, because in some ways it's a critical issue, very important issue, worth millions of dollars to the states, I think, that come first in terms of trying to make sense of this emerging industry. But it's just so confusing what's been happening here in Michigan, and we're very fortunate to have Attorney Joshua Covert here to join us. He's the representative for NORML here, and he also has been famous, I think, for defending Steve and Maria Green, who were the couple that had ultimately had their child taken away. Not only were they threatened with felony convictions that would have put them away for decades, but they lost their child custody in the process. It was just a nightmare case for a very nice young couple with severe health issues that were using medical marijuana to try to take care of themselves. And there's so much that's been happening. That Joshua, greetings and glad to see you here. You've been very busy lately on these cases.
Yes, I have been very busy. Thanks for having me today.
I want to know I went down and videoed the hearing for SB 660. It seems to me that there is an indication in the state of Michigan, this fast track bill that's come out of the Senate that's now headed to the House and is on the docket for being heard in December. It's going to be, I think, another busy December here in Michigan with the lame duck session as we go into the new year. This is a bill that would give Prairie Plant Systems out of Canada the opportunity, if the feds change marijuana from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 2 drug, to immediately open 1,000 plant facilities around the state. They were for a time the sole provider of cannabis in Canada. There's one other company authorized. They didn't have a very good record up there. There were lots of concerns about low quality, only one strain, not very high potency, all sorts of difficulties with their contract. What's the story? Why is this being fast-tracked here? Do you have any idea what's going on?
I really don't. I wish I had a reason for it. I think it comes down to money, really. I think there's deep pockets that are pushing this bill through, and I think a lot of the legislators are responsive to that, unfortunately.
And I think there's a bit of cronyism too. Chuck Perricone, who was himself the Speaker of the House of Representatives in the past, and it turns out from what we heard at the hearing, Randy Richardville, who was the head of the Senate committee that was holding the hearing, said that, well, gee, he had been meeting with Prairie Plant for 3 years on this bill. That's a long time to be meeting with somebody, and my hunch is it's because that was Chuck Perricone, one of his old friends, fellow GOP official. Those are the kinds of things that do tend to sort of grease the skids for companies, isn't it?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I kind of going back to it being fast tracked. It was fast tracked, I think, in part. Well, I should go back a little bit. I'm sorry. I have concern with it being fast tracked. For one, because like you mentioned, it has to be the federal government has to reclassify marijuana as Schedule 2.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next month. It's going to be a while. So why are we in this big push to get 660 through when we don't even know how soon it would take effect?
When or if.
Yeah, when or if. So I mean, it seems strange when it was pushed through the House in 5 days.
Yeah. Oh, the Senate.
The Senate. I'm sorry, you're right.
Yeah.
The Senate. Yeah, in 5 days. And why not have more hearings on the matter? Have time for it to develop when we don't even know when or if it's ever going to even take effect.
And it was brought up on Halloween, which isn't exactly the day that the media and everybody else is keeping track. And then the following Tuesday was when it passed the hearing. But what really, I think, what I see coming, if I'm right on this, and sometimes my prognostications are fairly accurate, I think people like Senator Rick Jones and others who really don't like the idea of medical marijuana only like it if it's in the hands of their cronies. And if they can make a lot of money off of it, then that's fine. We'll put the contract in their hands. And there were lots of assurances at that hearing that the Michigan caregivers, who have really, put up their personal freedom and everything else for this law, will be put out of business by this. There was a lot of paranoia about it. Boy, there were a lot of assurances. Don't worry. We would do nothing to get rid of the caregiver network. Jones made it pretty clear he'd love to see them go away, and he'd like to see this sort of industrial corporate model take over. I think that's what they're really pushing for.
We've had so much success with that in big pharmacopoeia.
Right.
The industrial model.
Right.
There's no bad drugs on the street at all.
Well, I think of the Big Mac.
Yeah.
Used to be you could get an actual hamburger made out of real beef and things like that. And now what is it? It's down to 2% meat in some hamburgers nowadays, and it's not a very good product, and it has all sorts of side effects. I think what impressed me was that, yes, they have their squabbles, but the medical marijuana community in Michigan is really active in trying to figure out how to help patients. I mean, I'm sure many of the clients that you've had, they help people for free sometimes, which is not something that Prairie Plant is going to be eager to do, hand out free cannabis to people. So,
one thing that impressed me about this was that the Canadian company does not seem to be very good at what they do.
no,
Wouldn't you want to be really good at it if you were trying to pitch yourself to another state?
yeah.
I don't quite understand it. They've had years now to perfect the processes and what they're doing and do the research, and they don't seem to have done it.
They grow it in an underground facility in Saskatchewan in a town named, I love this, Flim Flom.
It's not a dessert either.
Couldn't be a better, more aptly named place, right?
Flom.
And they found out there's all sorts of tailings that have contaminated a lot of the drugs coming out of there. So the whole idea that they were pitching at this hearing was, well, we got to get it out of the hands of these nasty caregivers who may be dirty people, and they're not taking proper care of their patients, and their patients are getting sick and dying. Nobody's getting sick and dying, and these are the people I would really trust. Were you there at the hearing? Did you see some of that going on?
I wanted to be at the hearing, but I had court appearances
Ah.
during the day. But I did have a chance to watch your videos that you posted online, and I saw the response that some of the patients got from the committee members, and it was appalling. It really was to see some of that. But I think with the bill, it's not only the fact that it's been fast tracked and that it's a large company that's being part of it. I think we have to look at the bill itself too, and there's lots of problems with the bill.
Oh, really? You would study the bill. What are the kinds of things you're seeing?
For one, anybody with a controlled substance offense in their past would not be able to take part in the Prairie Plant Systems bill. And so somebody that may have been using their medicine before it was legal may have had a conviction, and they're no longer able to take part in the Prairie Plant Systems bill. Somebody that maybe had a charge for something that wasn't even marijuana related, maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago, it doesn't matter. You're not going to be able to be a patient under the Prairie Plant Systems bill if you have a controlled substance of any sort. And I see that to be a problem.
Yeah. Why were they doing that? Why would they want to exclude part of their market?
I don't have an answer for that one.
It doesn't seem
It-
sensible to me.
It does not. No, I can't think of any reason.
Well, they want to keep that aspect of it illegal.
Ah.
We'd have two parallel systems here.
But it is, it's
They'd
interesting
still be
because,
able to arrest a certain number of people and
right.
keep busy.
And there is, this would create, not at first, at least, as I said, I think their long-term strategy is to get rid of the caregiver system that we have. But it would create two different systems. You couldn't have a card in both. You'd have to choose which system you were going to go into. Why would you have to create an entirely different system for this corporation?
I think the reason that they're putting forth is that some people don't have access to medicine, and this would guarantee people access to medicine. They could go to a pharmacy and get it. I don't think that's the right way of going about it, but I think that's the only rational reason I can think of that bill is to provide access to anybody without having to go through the channels and finding a caregiver and that sort of thing. Other than that, I can see no benefit in the bill.
Kind of reminds me of the difference between going to a big chain food store, or getting a share in a CSA, where you get to know the farmer, you know what kinds of chemicals they're using on the fruits and veggies, if any, the practices that they've used. It's fresh. It's something that if you want something special, they may be able to grow it for you. And that seems to me a very personal, that's the model that I think so many of us are embracing and looking how to replicate it in other areas of our lives. And it's the model that medical marijuana seems to be using here in the state. So switching to an industrial corporate model where it's distant, aloof, you don't know if the person behind the counter has any knowledge of what they're giving you, they're just filling an order. It seems to me not an improvement. I'm hoping that we see this sort of CSA model stick because so many of the caregivers there, really, they're inventing new strains, crossbreeding things, trying to find things that work for people for a variety of different conditions. They're really doing the research that should have been done years ago.
And I don't think any of them are getting rich.
No.
By any standard, frankly.
No. But I do think Prairie Plant Systems has visions of.
I have a question. Has anyone heard if Prairie Plants has got a similar approached another state to have a similar bill move through the
Oh,
legislature?
that's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah, I have not heard of any other
Neither.
state with this. I do remember probably about 3 years ago, I remember when they bought some mines up in the Upper Peninsula, that was in the news. And so I think, like you said, it's been in talks for 3 years, and I mean, that shows it. They've been planning this out for quite a while. I don't know if it's because of our proximity to Canada, why we were the first state, or
Yeah.
what. I'm not real sure.
But it would seem that the most lucrative markets to get in on right now would be in Washington and Colorado because they're the ones that are making everything legal, not just medical marijuana, but marijuana. And that would be a huge market. Maybe it is the cronyism here that's giving us an edge in this little battle. What are
Follow
we
the money.
What are we seeing out of the national laws now? I was reading you a quote earlier. There's a quote in the New Yorker about what's happening out in the state of Washington. And it says basically, Mark E.R. Kleiman, who is a drug policy analyst, says what the state is doing in actuality is issuing licenses to commit a felony. You were telling me, though, that out in Colorado, the DEA is still busting people, even though Attorney General Holder said that they would let the two states experiment.
Yeah, just last week in Denver and Boulder, there were a series of raids of both dispensaries and grow centers. And as far as I know, the federal government hasn't come out with any reason why they raided those institutions. It seems to me that they're not following the precedent set forth by Mr. Holder.
He had promised to give hands off to these experiments. He said there would be certain circumstances where they would go in. How many? He listed some.
He listed 8 different reasons that they may get involved. One was if it's being put into children's hands, if it was being sent to other states, if there was criminal aspects tied in with it, and a few other reasons. But there has been nothing put forth as to why they raided these places last week.
It's really shocking. I don't know why we still have these problems.
It must have been, to mix some sort of metaphor here, sobering in those two states. I mean, that always, because they pretty much said, hey, free reign, try everything, and then all of a sudden the DEA come knocking. Whoa. That'd be a new morning for them out there.
Well, that's a big worry. I was saying earlier that having done work in the past with the DEA, I would be a little bit nervous about them being a bit of a rogue organization. I'm not so sure that they really are controllable. They have been cowboys for years with their forfeiture program because it makes them self-funding. So they're less accountable because they're not really dependent on tax dollars since they get most of their money from fines through forfeiture, seizing assets and selling them. So even if you are found not guilty later, you don't get your stuff back. There were some famous cases I remember where they had a very expensive racehorse, and it ended up being worth zero because they didn't know how to feed it. The horse died. So I mean, they don't always do too well at all those kinds of enterprises. But the DEA is almost a government unto itself. Do you prosecute cases at the federal level in addition to the state?
I do work as a federal criminal defense attorney. I do.
And so you've had experience with, how much of a bigger challenge is it dealing in federal court to try to get juries to nullify?
It's difficult. The federal system's kind of just set up in a whole different ball game. It really is. You're looking at more mandatory minimum sentencing. If somebody gets 10 years, they're going to do 10 years, and that they have harsher sentencing. Discovery's difficult to get. The information about the case sometimes isn't provided until days before the case, and that's kind of par for the course in the federal system, unfortunately.
Now, one of the things we haven't seen here in Michigan is we haven't seen as much jury nullification as we've seen in some of the western states. In some of the western states, juries just really on a possession case are unwilling to convict in a lot of cases. That doesn't seem to happen as often here. You've been pretty successful, though. I mean, I was amazed when you were able to get the Green's daughter back. I mean, that was a huge deal. What kinds of, but we're still seeing a lot of other child custody cases, aren't we?
We are, unfortunately. I've got a couple CPS cases that I'm working on right now. I think the Green case has helped in a lot of ways. I think CPS has got a little different outlook now after having been through the Green case, and they've seen that if you're going to charge or take somebody's baby away if they're medical marijuana patients, you're going to have 4 attorneys stand up, ready to go, pro bono, and you're going to have to go against them. And I think for a while they've been operating under the assumption that we can kind of railroad these people. We can take their baby, and they're going to get an attorney that really doesn't fight for them. And I think with the Green case, by having David Rudoy, Daniel Groh, Mike Nichols, and myself all stand up, I think that sent a message to CPS that you can't really get away with this.
I think that's what
it's kind of like the ACLU representing people.
Yes, yeah, and unfortunately, it's hard because not many people have the resources and deep enough pockets to do this very often.
They probably thought a public defender was going to represent them.
Right, who was just going to want a quick plea bargain because that's all they can have the time to do. That's what the system is set up for. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with local attorney Joshua Covert about the implications and the changes that are happening here in Michigan very rapidly. We've also seen some more rulings come out of the Court of Appeals. This always gets exciting as well. I think the idea that sections 4 and 8 in the law gave a sort of blanket coverage to caregivers has now been thrown into a bit of doubt. What are these new rulings about?
Yeah, there's a few cases that have come out recently. I think the most relevant for right now is People v. Hartwick, which was just released mid last week. And that case puts a whole lot of new requirements on caregivers.
Yes.
Things that just really aren't reasonable. They're now supposed to know the condition that their patient's been diagnosed with. They're supposed to know who the doctor that diagnosed them was. They're supposed to know how much medicine the person should be using and for how long they should be using it. And I find that to be absurd given the medical marijuana law and who these people are that are being the caregivers. We don't even expect pharmacists to know that information.
That's what I kept thinking.
Yeah, I don't go up to my pharmacist and tell him what I'm taking that pill for. Thank you.
And he doesn't say to me, well, I don't know, should you really be taking 10 days of this? Maybe you could get by with 8. I think the implication is that somehow...
Is there some sort of HIPAA override on this, potentially?
Oh, that's a good question.
Seems like you're really getting into somebody's medical information that's private.
I wonder about that.
That could be an avenue used to challenge this. Unfortunately, with the HIPAA laws, there really aren't a lot of teeth into the law, I should say.
Okay, yeah.
It's kind of there in name only, unfortunately. But that's something that could be addressed potentially.
What do you think will happen with that? Is that put a chill into the industry now? Does this mean just a lot more record keeping on the part of people who are caregivers, and they're going to have to be more intrusive into their patients' conditions? I think part of it is just designed to sort of send a chill to patients too, that where you better be willing to and able to defend that you really need this stuff. Is that the idea behind this?
I really don't know the idea behind it. I really don't. I've read the opinion numerous times, and I really don't see how they came to the conclusions that they did. I think they're just finding a way to deny Mr. Hartwick's defense, and this is the way they found to do it. I don't think it's intellectually honest by any means.
That's what's going on.
Results oriented, I guess.
Okay,
But
because
none of
I
that's in
tried
the-
reading that.
Yeah, none of it's in the original law.
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, in fact, the original law is explicit
Right.
that in any kind of dispute that the judgment should go in the favor of the caregiver and the patient, and that there should be this sort of goodwill, on the part of the officials implementing the law to try to be as honor the spirit of the law as much as possible. And this certainly doesn't do that.
And with like the bona fide patient-physician relationship, that's part of Section 8 of the Medical Marijuana Act. They're now requiring the caregivers to really police that.
Right.
What are they supposed to do? To go to every doctor's appointment with their patient and that sort of thing? I mean, that's just not feasible.
Yeah, it seems like a backdoor way to try to shut it down. Do we know the composition of that court well enough to know how many are up for re-election? What are the possibilities of changing the composition of that court in the near future?
That's not something that I know right now.
I don't either. But I keep thinking they just inherited the job from the Hingham court to be able to now handle all the challenges from the governor. That should keep them busy for a while. I don't know.
Joshua, is there this is the old name for them, they've got all kinds of strange names now, but Political Action Committee among medical marijuana community?
Oh, do they have PACs?
And and where you get into a lobby. I know there's a lobbyist, but is there a Political Action Committee?
I'm not real sure. I'm not much
Okay.
of a politician myself. I try to focus just on defending people in the courts.
It's probably a good move.
So what would that mean to you as a defense attorney when you see these kinds of decisions come down? Does that mean that if you have a case now with somebody who didn't have that kind of record keeping, or at least didn't say so when they were being investigated for their conviction, does that complicate your defense?
It does, at least for now. This is just a Court of Appeals case, and I do expect that this will probably be brought up to the Supreme Court. I know there has been talk with the attorney involved in this case, and that's something he's considering. So far, the Court of Appeals has been pretty adamant about denying patients' rights and caregivers' rights. And it's kind of been shown by case by case by case. Luckily, the Supreme Court's been pretty reasonable so far. So part of me in any case I'm going to take on is try to preserve that issue so that if the Supreme Court does overturn it, we could get the correct result. And that's something I do anticipate after reading the article and knowing the Supreme Court and how they've ruled on King and Klonek and Kuhn, some of the other cases that have gotten that far. I could see this being overturned.
We're building quite a body of marijuana law in this state. I mean, it seems like the prosecutors are really pushing a lot of unique theories for trying to justify continuing to prosecute people, even though the law says that they shouldn't. And as we test it, some strange decisions come down at the Court of Appeals record that I'm not even sure the prosecutors anticipated. I mean, we saw cannabis oil go away overnight because the way they decided to calculate how you could consider marijuana as plants only and can't have it in any other form. And I'm not even sure that the most aggressive prosecutor thought they were going to be able to get that one through. The legislature is potentially able to pick up other laws along with Senate Bill 660. Is there any hope that they will try to clarify, or if there's the Irwin law that's ahead of them, is there a package that's headed in? Or
I believe there are going to be 3 bills discussed at the beginning of December. One of them being a dispensary bill, the Prairie Plant Systems bill.
And I think the third one might be the decriminalization bill that Representative Irwin out of Ann Arbor is pushing. So a couple of them might be pro-medical marijuana in the sense of restoring some dispensaries and giving people an opportunity to see some of the fines go away. But my hunch is, I think I know which. If I were a betting person, I know which one of the 3 is going to sail through, and the other 2 might not.
I got a quick question too. Have you seen any movement on Lansing's recent vote on how that might, which kind of decriminalized in a way, marijuana? Have you heard anything? What's the word on the street?
I haven't seen anybody charged with the marijuana crime from Lansing involving less than an ounce on public or private property. I don't know if that's just because they haven't called me up yet and I haven't talked to them, or it's not happening. I really don't know. And as far as it being decriminalized, I think it's important to put out there that it actually was legalized under certain conditions. It wasn't,
Yep,
there's no fine on it.
You're right.
It's legalized. Yeah.
And so I think that's a big step that, that we were the first city in the state of Michigan to legalize at least some part of possession.
I had a student who was doing a story on that issue, and he talked to someone at the police department who said, well, that's only part of the charter. If we go into somebody's home and we find marijuana there, we're still going to do what we always did. And I thought, I don't know whether that's that the training hasn't happened yet, or that they're still grappling with this, or what's going to go on. But I know that Andrew Hank, who was in charge of the initiative, wasn't happy to hear when the student went back and said to him, showed him the quote from the police department. So I think there's still some ambiguity in how this may play out.
Yeah, the officers can always charge somebody under state law. They really could. And it's just a mad difference between writing one number versus another number on the ticket itself. And that's something they could choose to do. I would hope they don't, because they're the city of Lansing, and they're their police department. And the city of Lansing spoken. They've said it's legal for someone over the age of 21 to possess less than an ounce on private property. And I think that's who they need to listen to, are the people of Lansing.
It's interesting. I was reading today that they were saying that, well, in the state of Washington, the number of driving under the influence charges of people who are on marijuana have gone up substantially since the passage of the law, that they had 750 arrests compared to 500 during the first 6 months of the year, 500 in the previous year. And I thought to myself, but I wonder if they're testing more. I mean, I think it was being used to suggest that all of a sudden there's been an explosion in marijuana use and driving. I don't think that, has that been a very common, do you get many cases to you on driving under the influence for marijuana as opposed to?
I do quite a bit.
Oh, you do?
I do, yes. That's something in the state of Michigan, drunk driving arrests have been going down for many years now. And if you look at it, marijuana arrests have been going up at the same time. And so I think they've realized that some of the message they've been putting out there about drunk driving has kind of worked, and that there aren't as many people drunk driving, but they still need to make their arrests. They still need to make their money. And so now they've kind of diverted some of the attention normally paid to drunk drivers to look for people that are under the influence of marijuana. And that is, it's a little bit crazy right now, because there are no real tests to determine is somebody under the influence or not. There is something called drug recognition expert training, which was started in Los Angeles. And one of the things they look for, just to be real brief, is if they suspect somebody is under the influence of marijuana, they're told to have them stick out their tongue. And they're supposed to look to see if the person's tongue is green. If the tongue is green, they're under the influence.
See, which is bizarre.
Dr. Zeus does drug law.
It is, and that your eyes are red.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. This season of the year, everybody's eyes are red. No, it's bizarre because they don't really have a good test for it, do they?
Not for testing impairment. Absolutely not.
It's in your system, but not impairment.
Nothing's been scientifically validated. And in fact, the National Highway Traffic Safety Association, the people that started the standardized field sobriety test for drunk driving, have done studies on marijuana and driving. And they've said that it's impossible to create a correlation between the level of THC in somebody's blood and impairment.
Is that right? So there's no correlation. Do they have a field sobriety test in the sense that, they have you walk a line, or do those things work at all?
Those tests have only been validated to detect impairment due to alcohol. There's been nothing created other than the DRE training, and the DRE training isn't specific to marijuana. It's meant to detect prescription drugs, cocaine, heroin, marijuana, LSD, you name it. And so it's not real specific. Some of the stuff that they test is blood pressure, heart rate, muscle tone. They are told to look for heat bumps on the back of a tongue.
That's what I've heard of too, the bumps on the tongue. Just
lots of different things, and none of them really have ever been scientifically validated. They've never been proven to be able to show that somebody's under the influence whatsoever.
Climate change.
I interviewed Werner Spitz, who was the coroner in Wayne County many years ago, and I was asking him, I worked on the Burn Drug Grant many years ago. We were trying to find out, okay, if alcohol is the number one drug for which people are impaired when they're driving, I asked him, what would be number 2 on the list? Is it going to be marijuana, cocaine, heroin, what is it? And he said, no, it's contact cold medication. Now, that shows you, first of all, how many years ago that was, but the reality is cold medications are actually a real problem for driving. Do we know how marijuana affects people, or are cops going to just have to hold up a bag of Fritos and see if somebody goes for it?
That's pretty good logic, really.
Well, what they've been doing now, really, is asking questions, and then if they think the person is under the influence of marijuana, really what they do is they arrest them. They get a search warrant for their blood, and they let the blood determine if somebody has THC in their system or not. That's really what they're relying on right now. But that's after they've already arrested the person. They've
Right.
already, put him through the pain of being arrested.
Yes.
They've already intruded into their body to take their blood. And so it's kind of like the,
And if you
arrest
refuse,
first.
then you're automatically guilty.
Yeah, it's kind of like arrest first, ask questions later is
Yeah.
the policy right now. And they take somebody's blood, they test it using a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer,
Mhm.
a very sensitive piece of machinery. And we've been able to show that the levels that they detect was 1 nanogram or
Oh.
above. A nanogram's a billionth of a gram.
Right.
But we've been able to show that in low levels between 1 and 5 or 6, that they can't actually detect that based on
Right.
the machines they use. And we had a judge in Mason just probably about 6 months ago declare that their test was not admissible scientifically because the background noise in the instrument
Right.
there's something they can't differentiate between that and the actual presence of THC.
Besides which, a nanogram would be indicative of absolutely nothing. I mean, there'd be no correlation at all. That's not a high enough level to indicate anything.
You're right, but unfortunately in Michigan, if you're not a medical marijuana patient, even if you have 1 nanogram,
Oh, that's
it's per
right.
se automatic
Oh.
drugs driving.
Ah.
And I think there's a problem with that because, like you said, that doesn't mean the person wasn't a safe driver.
Certainly.
And then also, how do we know if they can even reliably detect low levels like that,
Yeah.
given the methods and the procedures they use currently?
This is LCC Radio 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Joshua Covert, and one of my concerns over the years is that it seemed that we reached a point almost of no return as well with things like drunk driving, where it went from being a structured system that was really designed to try to drive down highway accidents and highway deaths as a result of drinking, into becoming almost a separate whole industry that took on a life of its own. The people who got caught up in that system ended up spending a fortune in order to be able to go to drunk school and do all the things you had to do, and these were all done by outside contractors who were, in some cases, it seemed to me, cronies of the politicians giving the programs, and to the point where even some of the people who were early supporters of MAD have been concerned that after a while, what you really want to do is go after the serious offender, the person who is really the person that's a repeat offender, many of whom will drive even if you take their license away. One simple solution to that, for example, would be to put a breathalyzer in all cars. The minute you did that, the cost would come down to the point that for an extra I heard somebody estimating an extra $15 to $20, you could put in a sensor in the steering wheel of all automobiles so they wouldn't operate if the person behind the wheel was drunk. It would seem to me that rather than maintain this sort of machinery of criminal justice to deal with the problem, we could have some technological solutions coming along to this kind of thing, couldn't we?
I don't see that happening, at least because that's assuming those instruments are accurate and reliable, and they're really not when it comes down
Even
to
for
it.
alcohol?
Even for alcohol.
Oh.
You could trick them by cologne or hand wash.
Oh.
And well, then they also
I got pulled up by the TSA because I had glycerin in my hand lotion, and glycerin is is nitroglycerin, basically one of the components.
Yeah, but I think when we're dealing with people, everybody's a little different. Everybody's anatomy is a little bit different. The way their body handles different substances.
I see.
And in order to do a breathalyzer, they have to make assumptions. They have to make assumptions about how much breath somebody's putting out, where that breath's coming from, and everybody's a little bit different. And so for one person may be intoxicated, the other person may not, and the machine's going to probably say they're both intoxicated. And so that's the problem that I see with it, is that I don't think there's like a one solution to stop drunk driving, just because everybody's so different when it comes to the makeup of their body. Now, maybe someday there's technology that comes out that's an advancement and could work, but right now I don't see the current level of our science being able to do that accurately.
Well, no wonder you don't drive. You've seen too many of these cases. I guess if you weigh 300 pounds, 6 drinks is different for you than for the 90-pound female. I mean, we do, all the variables as to how we metabolize alcohol make a big difference.
And anytime you're dealing with breath, too, how long ago the drink was can make a big difference. There can be something called, the machine's made to detect breath alcohol, not mouth alcohol. So if you actually have a residual amount of alcohol in your mouth, or even it's even as much as, or if you have a cut in your mouth, then you've got blood in your mouth, alcohol's in your blood. So the breath test is going to be measuring not the breath from your lungs, but it's going to be measuring both the breath from your lungs, but then also the alcohol from the blood from the cut in your mouth. And so there's so many variables that I just don't see it working.
I remember remember reading when Princess Diana was killed that the only reliable tests were really those that where they went into the back of the eyeball on a cadaver in order to judge the alcohol level of the driver, Henri Paul. And even then, there was a lot of controversy over it. I mean, it is, you're absolutely right. It's very difficult scientifically to be accurate on these things. But yet we have laws built up around this where people are, spending 2 and 3 years with their lives disrupted as a result. It's very interesting. What do you think is going to be the ultimate upshot here in Michigan? Is it going to get easier or harder for caregivers and patients in the near future?
In the near future, I think it's probably going to just keep getting harder as long as the Court of Appeals keeps putting out cases like this, dampening the rights of the patients and caregivers. I don't see it changing.
What would a caregiver have to do now to comply? Go back to all of their patients and try to get all of their medical histories and somehow document all of that and confer about which doctors they have and what diagnosis the doctor gave them? I mean, what would make anybody think that the patient should share that anyhow?
Yeah, I don't think they should have to share that. I think we're basically making caregivers, we're putting them in the place of the doctor. And they're obviously not doctors.
Yeah.
They're people that are just trying to help out, but we're requiring them to do things that doctors do, like figure out how much dosage somebody should have, how long they should be using it for, and those sorts of things. And those aren't things that we, the people, when we created the Medical Marijuana Act, envisioned caregivers being required to do.
What is the timetable for the Supreme Court to work its way through these numerous issues that seem to be getting thrown at it? The wheels of justice do grind slowly. What are we looking at in a case like Carruthers? How long before we'll know?
Well, I do know in Carruthers they have filed with the Supreme Court. So
Okay.
that one should be coming out relatively shortly. And I
They've
say
agreed to
relative,
take
I
it up?
mean in terms of it's been filed.
Oh.
That's the last update I've got so far.
Okay.
But I haven't been following it too closely the last month or so. I expect it probably will be taken up. As far as Hartwick, that just came out last week, so we're probably looking at over a year before we actually find something out about that.
Lots of people get caught in the gears of justice in the meanwhile. Well, I'm sure it's going to keep you busy. What's happening at the national front with NORML?
Just a lot of concern right now about what happened out in Colorado. That everybody was assuming that they were going to kind of be hands off, and apparently that's not happening. It almost seems like the federal government told them, "Hey, we're not going to come in and raid you," so people could open up businesses. People
Right.
could go ahead and do it, and then as soon as they do, they step in and raid them. So that's what everybody's kind of up in arms on the national level right now, is at least that the raids in Colorado.
Has anyone asked Halder, the Attorney General, if he had knowledge of this? I mean, that seems
Or
to
has
me,
he gone on the record and answered? They probably haven't been able to get a hold of him on it.
because it's going to be interesting to see if he gave his imprimatur to doing these. I mean, I guess if I ran that agency, if you're going to do something like that, I need to sign off on those. Because at that level, after I gave my word, it's like, yeah, you're not doing those unless I get it's like getting a wiretap. I need to see that in
And
front of
see,
a
my
judge.
problem is that Holder is so embattled right now because of all sorts of, there's always these efforts to impeach him, and there's everything from the gun issue that they keep trying to get him on, the guns into Mexico. I'm not sure he really can afford to just fire the head of this DEA if he's defying him. I mean, I think that would be very hard for Holder to do in this era. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons I think the DEA has a tendency to go its own way for a while. It's very hard to control those people. Well, this is going to be an interesting era. My concern is I suspect in 5 or 10 years, we'll see some kind of movement at the national level to clarify this. Boy, it's going to be a brutal 5 or 10 years for quite a few people caught in the gears.
And I think the changes, as I've said often here, it's going to be at a political level. It's when you look at who's up for election and you decide through a political action process to not elect those individuals. And that's the only thing that really changes government.
So law isn't going to be the answer in this case.
Not in the environment. I don't think it's in the environment we live in.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Joshua, for coming and updating us. This is really a troubling issue because it seems Michigan is right at the sort of forefront of these kinds of problems. Thank goodness that you're here to help a lot of people, and I'm so glad that you helped the Greens get their baby back. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
They're having a happy Thanksgiving this week.
Yes,
They are.
yes, that's a wonderful thing. When we see what else the Supreme Court has been involved in, Bill, maybe, I don't know.
Well, the Michigan Supreme Court decided a case that started in Lansing where a person walked into the Capillary District Library downtown branch and had an open carry of a weapon. And the Capital Area District Library decided that wasn't suitable in a library situation. So this, through their board, they put in place policy, but this case wove itself up through the courts, and the Michigan Supreme Court said that libraries, until the law is changed, cannot enforce this. It has to require a change in the law, which is what we were kind of talking about before with Supreme Court. They're pretty adamant about that. So what we're looking at right now is open carry in a library if you choose, and there's a lot of people who like to make that kind of presence felt. I'm not quite sure
Well,
why.
they're doing a test. I mean, it's a test, isn't it? It isn't really that they just happen to want to.
Not so far, right, right. The people walked in to push the issue, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, what I think people don't realize is that this has not always been the law of the land. The idea that you can have open carry in all of these situations. There's been an aggressive movement on the part of the gun rights people to open up public spaces and private spaces too, bars, for example, and insist that it should be legal under the Second Amendment for people to go into places with open carry. And this is a real concern because I remember how smug one of the speakers was at the Capitol when he talked about how a few years ago you couldn't have gone into the Capitol with your AK-47, now you can. Well, I think it unnerves police officers in particular when they watch somebody walk in with an AK-47 into the Capitol.
It unnerves me when I see them walking anywhere.
Yeah.
There's too many situations where the people that have these things aren't responsible.
And
I would be terrified if I was a police officer.
And the issue of accidental discharge, we've seen that happen where the guns go off at gun shows when people are showing them. I mean, it's really not a safe thing to have around just casually because you might want to have it with you. I found myself getting increasingly uncomfortable when I went down there to the gun rights rally last year and I was interviewing people because I was pushing them on some issues and you just never know. I mean, that's a real concern.
Well, one of the situations that was described to me that could reasonably happen is, see, a library, you can carry a concealed and an open carry.
Both.
Because it's not a gun-free zone.
I see.
So you could have someone in the library with a concealed weapon who sees someone come in with an open carry weapon. What would your first thought be in a library?
That person's coming there for deadly purposes.
That's right.
In fact, that's what the gun rights people keep saying, is that we want armed people to open fire on those who might, who are coming in with that AK-47 into the movie theater to get you, right?
That's sort of what they say, but does it work in reality? People that are saying that probably have never faced someone shooting at them.
Yeah.
Or have had to shoot at a human being.
We see this move for things like the stand your ground laws, of which Michigan is one.
Yes.
We're a state that has a stand your ground law. Stand your ground has already complicated the gun issue by making it, I think, more likely that somebody feels they have the right to shoot compared to where they felt they could before in terms of what was and was not self-defense. That would even add to the problem here with open carry, wouldn't it?
It certainly could. I just think it's reasonable. If you see someone coming into a library with a gun, I'm going to be aware of it.
Well, yeah. Why do you need a gun in a library?
Books are dangerous.
Well, they are.
Now, in Wayne County, do you think that's going to be the defense of the gentleman who was at home and shot the woman through the screen door, who came to his door, shot her with a shotgun?
Stand your ground?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure how that's going to go, but the whole situation down there was certainly ugly.
So apparently now it's just making noise outside is enough to be perceived as threatening to the point where you'd have to stand your ground.
That's the defense they'll have to make, yeah.
It's going to be a stretch, I would think. I would hope. I really don't want to see people encouraged to use deadly force to try to resolve every kind of incident like that. That's what I think we're getting to.
One of the things that was, if people recall, is I think Joan Bauer, when it was one of her last things in session before she retired, was she tried to get a bill through that would create a no-gun zone for libraries. And it never got out of committee.
Wow.
So the odds of this moving anywhere, I'm not sure how it's going to happen. I mean, libraries aren't the most powerful organizations in the world politically.
Right, they aren't.
It's not their nature.
No, I can't, yeah. And the challenge now is that if this was a case where the previous lower court ruling stood because the Supreme Court just elected not to pick up the case. So it's very unlikely that another case is gonna come to them in the near future that they're gonna be running the rule on.
No,
So
no,
this is gonna
this
remain.
will take an act of the legislature to expand that gun-free zone.
Now, Starbucks, for example, went on record saying that they want no one with guns in their stores. Can they enforce that as policy? We've never seen that tested either, have we?
I don't think it has. I think they can.
Well, see, I was trying to, I mean, and this is always dangerous
But
territory.
that's open carry. It's
Right.
concealed, you don't know.
Right. And, you know, I mean, if it's a case of somebody who's carrying money to a bank vault and that's why they have it, maybe that's not such a bad idea. Although they shouldn't stop at Starbucks on the way, I guess.
Well, last year when I was in Biggie's having a meeting in downtown when there was a demonstration on open carry, probably 25 people in there had their weapons with them.
They
It was a bit unnerving.
Yeah.
Not that I'm sure they're all trained with them, but it was
Wow.
pretty interesting. I don't want to live in a world like that, frankly.
Well, see, one of the challenges is under the federal civil rights laws, remember, they had to give you access to the restaurant or the Woolworths, right? So
Right.
if you can argue that the Second Amendment,
That's where it is. It's
That's where
it's
it
a civil
is.
right, right?
I'm not sure Starbucks is going to be able to enforce that ruling if
I don't-
somebody really wants to test it.
And I bet it has been tested. We probably just have not heard of it. Probably like they probably have not heard of the cattle case in Oregon or something.
The cattle case?
Yeah, the Capital Area District
Oh.
Library. You know,
Oh.
it's
I was thinking
TTL, yeah. But it just I think it just creates an unnerving situation in a library which has a lot of little kids.
It does.
Especially typically the kids sections now are on ground floor and
Yeah.
they're there for a reason, to watch the kids.
Oh,
to
I
keep-
see.
Librarians and libraries have figured out the kids should be in sight at all times.
Oh, that's a good idea. I never
So
thought of that.
They've made an effort now to not put them in faraway places where they can't be seen. It's where
Ah.
everybody can see them.
Oh, that's good.
You know, it was done for a good reason too.
Yeah. Wow. Well, the other thing we've seen out of government, well, this is LCC Radio, 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. Bill and I are talking about various state of Michigan rulings, and also we have another state of Michigan scandal brewing here, I think. And that was when we found out how much certain people in state government. Bill, have you ever had an 80 to 90% raise in 1 year when your job title didn't change?
I don't think anyone has. Now, I can see if it was a commission or bonus, it could happen, but not.
Maybe.
But this is huge.
Not me. I never had one.
Going
like that.
from 128,000 to 233,000.
Yes. And then who is the highest paid person in the state?
It
Now?
is John Brodigan.
And what does he
Brodigan.
do?
He is the state's chief investment officer. He invests the state's pension funds.
Right. And those are huge.
They're huge in it, but nowhere have I seen how much they are.
Right.
You know, a total in any of the stories.
Or how much he improved the return.
Right, and I think that's important. I mean, if you're going to be paid at that level, you're going to want to have some goals that are measurable.
Performance
the
markers.
the dashboard sort of effect.
Well,
I mean,
that's- yeah.
anybody that watches their own investments can go on a website and look at percentages.
Aren't in today's era, when you have really so much uncertainty in the market, and we've seen what the crash of 2008 did to so many of these funds, is there really that much difference in anybody's ability to manage them?
Well, that's a debate that you'll read every day in the Wall Street Journal.
Well, true. Yeah.
Personally, within some parameters, no. You know, excluding some parameters, no. I don't think so. I mean, the risky stuff, it's always going to be risky.
Right.
I mean, yeah, you can go into something like an overseas investment or medical or tech bubble
Yes.
and make a fortune,
And you
can lose that
your shirt.
fortune tomorrow morning.
And even the supposedly safe investments. It's sort of like with climate change. You can pick any 10-year period and say temperatures are either going up or down depending on which 10 you pick. If you really look at the long term of the stock market, it has not paid off as well as it was supposed to. Indeed, it is not as safe as an investment. And there are times where you can make all the wrong calls and really it can be costly. A lot of universities are being forced to look at their endowments and they're not that keen on sharing that information with people and showing how much they've lost over these.
Well, you bring up an
last
interesting
years.
point. I wonder what MSU
Right.
investment counselors, I call them counselors, but agents, I wonder what they pay them.
I know. This idea that to get the top talent, right? Which I think is insulting to all the other people that the governor told, we're going to cut your wages.
And you must not be talented enough.
I guess.
Yeah.
School teachers aren't
But
very
it-
good.
but
Police aren't very
What's
good.
interesting is this has been an old age-old argument: who should make the most money, a nurse or
Right.
who's taking care of a human life,
Yeah.
a police officer, a teacher, or an investment agent?
It's very sad when you look at it in a lot of ways. I mean, we see things like childcare workers, for example, and they certainly have an incredible responsibility for taking care of young children, and they're among the poorest paid people in the society at the same time. I mean, hasn't the Wall Street Journal even done things where they've had a monkey throw darts against the wall, and they've done better stock picking than the
Absolutely,
pros?
you can find things like that all over. I I think it's like horse racing.
Yeah.
When it comes down to it, sure, you can go get a good investment counselor and they can help you if you're making really stupid mistakes.
Right.
But at some point, I don't think the edges are so close to each other that it doesn't really matter probably.
I would also recommend, there was an excellent Frontline special, and I believe it was called The Retirement Gap. I saw a statistic the other day that the average American has no more than $27,000 saved for retirement. And if that's the national average, we're in real trouble, because Social Security was never designed to be at a high enough level to be able to take care of you. It was supposed to be part of what you had in retirement. Now we see something like the big fight over the retirement union benefits in Detroit, for example.
Right.
These people were not allowed to participate in Social Security. The average for a Detroit retiree is $19,000 a year. That is hardly enough to live on.
Especially in a major city like Detroit, it's one of the most
Yeah.
costly cities in America.
Yeah. And now the governor is saying that these people deserve salaries of $250,000
And
and
higher,
up.
300, a third of a million.
333,000, up from 175. And that's just really shocking to me, because you know what? There are plenty of people who have expertise in that area who would be happy to work for 175, wouldn't they?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think they probably do as good a job. Yeah, it's messy, and I don't think it was. Again, I think with the governor, when he makes and does things, announcements, and then does things, I don't think they're prepared to
I
have
don't either.
to have the details behind it. And I think that comes because he was the CEO of a company.
You didn't have to answer to people.
No, you answered to a small board. You
Right.
didn't have to answer to the public.
And those boards are not very tough on you.
No. So they don't really have the reasons that we should be doing this. What are they? I mean, Mike Finney, who's the head of Michigan Economic Development Corporation, makes $250,000.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I could argue that's the most important job in the state.
Yeah.
I could argue that
Yeah.
pretty logically, because he's the one that brings business here to invest.
So why would
So
he make less?
see, that's the thing. Or why would you make more than the governor?
Well, that's true too. Yeah.
I mean, that person is the CEO.
Right.
So that doesn't happen in the private sector. I don't know why this happened.
I
It
don't
makes
either.
there's a missing point here that I don't quite get.
Well, especially when you realize how incendiary it is. There's nothing that gets voters riled up more than when the legislature wants to vote itself a raise.
Right.
Oh my goodness. I mean, and some of those people literally do. I mean, they are really working their behinds off in the legislature. It is not a fun job. They have to do all this fundraising on top, and they don't make very much money. They don't make as much money as half the people they're begging money from. And yet they're in a situation where they're just under this intense scrutiny. To give them another $5,000 a year is a big deal. To do this by fiat and expect that nobody's going to notice, that's just not politically
Plus, they
astute.
didn't announce it; it was leaked out.
Right.
As a state employee who is retired, that basically these people are making my money for my pension. I
Right.
want somebody that's really good. But did you tell me they are really good? I didn't see it. I don't know, and I'm going to look into it. I'm kind of curious. How good are they?
Yeah, how big is the fund? What have their returns been over the years?
Yeah.
How big a staff does it take to administer it? What kinds of choices do they make? I don't know.
And I don't even know if they charge down on the pension fund,
Well, that's true too.
like a load. I mean, kind of like the load in the private
Right.
sector. I have no clue.
One of the
Kind of
biggest things that
embarrassing.
shocked me when I saw that Frontline special was that it seems trivial to people when you say to them, there's only a 2% a year fee to manage a retirement account for things like my TIA, CREF, and all these other companies that are managing them. And it showed that when you talk about 2% of somebody's money, and that's compound interest over time, 30 or 40 years while you're working for your retirement, that is an enormous amount of money, and it means that your retirement is significantly below what it should be. It's not just a small amount. I mean, even without compound interest, in 10 years, that's 20% of what you should have had.
And it's 2% is often the difference between making a profit and not.
Right.
I mean, you look at some of the funds, they're low.
Yeah,
And
they
if
are.
you're paying that load up front, sometimes you pay 4% in a load too,
Yes.
not just the management.
Yes.
I mean, they have to make money. Companies
Certainly.
have to make money.
Yeah.
So you want to watch how much you're paying up front, but also how much you're paying every month, really.
We've let the financial industry have an awful lot of control and a much larger percentage of our overall economic pie nowadays because manufacturing has shrunk so much. But it's a real worrisome trend that we're seeing too many shenanigans in that area, not enough regulation. I think the governor stepped in it with this one. My hunch is this is going to be a huge issue in the next election.
Oh, I think it is, yeah. And the unions have already made that point.
Well, one other good bit of news that's happening in our community coming up is that Cristo Rey and the Old Town Commercial Association have banded together, and they're going to, right this week, be offering, and in fact, I tried to reach somebody at OTCA today, and they said everybody's over at Cristo Rey. They're all busy putting together the packages.
Packing them.
And what's going on with that?
Well, what they do is they raise money throughout the year to support families at Thanksgiving. And they buy turkeys, the whole fixing sort of,
Yeah.
and make sure those individuals have it. Typically, these things were run by people donating things. They've gotten more away from that, and now they'd rather have money where you can go out and buy, the can that isn't expired, something like that. But they've got this up to 150 families. There's a lot of families in the community. It's totally volunteer, started by one or two people in that Old Town Commercial Association community who know the people around them.
The people from Such Video were involved.
Right, Such Video was the person that started it, and it's really grown. Now it's become part of the whole Old Town Commercial Association. And you can find out more information because you can still get money. They raise money year round for this by going to the Old Town Commercial Association website.
You know, I was thinking the other day when I was looking at groups like OTCA, we were talking earlier about the CSAs, the community supported agriculture. We're really talking about community supported business here, that these are small entrepreneurial businesses. We're not really talking about people with large portfolios coming in and trying to establish a franchise business in there. These are homegrown people. They rely on their fellow citizens from the community buying from them. Maybe even occasionally it costs $1 or $2 more than it might have elsewhere, but you're helping out your local community. And I see something like the association doing these kinds of community activities. And to me, it has a different feel than if a corporation just does corporate giving. All too often, that's just handing over a check for good PR. This is really the people in the office going and spending the day over there, packing the boxes, making sure that they get delivered. It's a very personalized kind of enterprise.
It is, and I'm glad you mentioned that from the standpoint of you think of OTCA and Main Street, which they are, is a different kind of organization. It really is grassroots community driven.
It is.
That's one thing I was trying to explain to somebody the other day about they're new to Lansing. It took them 3 years to get kind of adjusted here, and I just said to them about a conversation we've had. In Lansing, you can do anything you want. Just raise your hand.
Yes.
And they said, really? What do you mean? And so I went into just some examples, and that's what the Main Street OTCA is about. If you're a business down there and you want to get involved, you can do anything you want.
And I like that so much when I see what's happening to Thanksgiving with so many of these major corporations now taking away the holiday from people.
That's right.
And what bothers me is that if you were paying them triple time and you're making it a voluntary situation where somebody who may not have family, but they really need the money, that might be okay for them. But it's not. It's mandatory. You have to be there. It's part of your job to be fired if you're not.
So you're going to be pushing Thanksgiving dinner for them to 11 o'clock, and it changes the whole family structure and family situation, I think.
We get very, very few holidays in this culture. Compared to other European countries, we have almost no leisure time.
Especially one like this where everybody sits typically together.
Yeah.
They may not get along together, but they sit typically together. I just didn't care for that at all.
I was shocked at the number of companies that have jumped on
And
that.
there'll be more next year.
Well, I'm afraid that's what's going to
There'll be
happen.
more next year.
So isn't it nice to see a community group of small businesses that I'm sure need every dollar they can get into the kitty decide that they're not going to go that route.
Right, yeah. I don't think Old Town's gonna be open on Thanksgiving.
No.
They're gonna be home with their families. They're small businesses.
And that's that's to me one of the charm of that whole operation. I'm hoping we can replicate and see more and more of that where we.
Well, like in Rio Town.
Yes.
If that comes to Rio Town and some other smaller areas in the city. I had an office down there for 5 years. It's remarkable the kind of attitude that is down there, and the city lets it happen.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Well, I do want to wish all of our listeners and very happy Thanksgiving, and I hope that you're going to be able to have your family and friends, and that nobody has to be sort of impressed into service to go out and work on that holiday, and wouldn't be such a bad idea to carry it over to the same spirit on maybe head out to Old Town on Black Friday in order to support some small businesses out there. This is Lansing Online News Radio here on WLNZ 89.7 LCC Radio in Lansing, Michigan. Tune in and we'll see you next Monday night at 7 o'clock. Thank you very much.